Okay.
All right.
So we're doing an article on Cellarmanship, guys selling beer home and stuff like that. So we just wanted to hear some of your guys' thoughts on aging beer.
Big wide open question.
It is.
And area.
Should we start with what styles shouldn't be?
All of them?
All of them? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, let's not start there.
No.
It's too short. We won't get to the 20-minute mark. No, I think there's definitely merits behind taking a really, really big beer, especially, that's not hop driven, and putting it down. The big one with hops is not just that I dislike the what's created by it, but the brewer intended for that hops to, that hop nose and bite and all that to be pronounced. And when you let it sit, it's definitely going to become muted over time. Irregardlessly of all the oxidation of beta acids and stuff like that, that'll create just a kind of a harsh bitterness. But the big thing is I think really strong like stouts. The higher the alcohol, of course, that helps. But the black malts, the roasted barleys, the chocolate malts, they definitely age better. They become more of that chocolate mousse, sherry, that aspect. Andy has poured 3 hogs. Only one of them should be drank, but we'll try them all.
Yeah, we have a 2005 hog here, a 2008 hog, and a 2012 hog. In Hog Heaven, it is a very highly dry hop barley wine. Fits well into the American barley wine style. If you think like Sierra Nevada Bigfoot, that sort of thing. And that's another one. Like people age Bigfoot all the time, and that one. Oh man, I want Bigfoot as fresh as possible.
Too.
Yeah, Old Crustacean, huge hoppy beer. Those two, I want those 2 beers, 2 weeks old, maybe 4 weeks old. I understand there's a little alcohol in them, but to me that's also part of the flavor profile. And in general, the muting of alcohol that you're getting over time is far outweighed by that beta acid oxidation, trans 2 oxidation that just turns it into. I mean, cardboard's the common descriptor. I don't know, that's not even necessarily the best descriptor for me. To me, it gets earthy and dirty. If I smell these, I pour beer on the table.
It's his drinking problem.
You taste the 2012 hog, you smell it. It smells like huge hops, huge everything. You go back to that 08, and it's not necessarily cardboard. It's just, it's dirty. It's like someone poured a shovel of dirt in this glass. And this is a well-cellared beer. This has been chilled since the day we took it off the line. We have some pretty nice equipment here. I know the oxygen content is low. This is as well as a 4-year-old Hog Heaven can be made and cellared. And yet still, right off the bat, all the hops are gone. I just smell dirt.
Yeah, for me it's almost like you just found a Foot Locker that hasn't been opened in 30 years in grandma's basement, and you got to go through it, and it's I actually do get some of the cardboard, but it's more like old damp paper, that kind of or old just biomass, like a old wet leaf pile or whatever. And I mean, if you compare obviously the 2 polar opposites here, you compare the freshest one, it's just a straight hop hit, big hop forward nose. And it's for me, it's why would I want to lay that down instead of enjoy it right now? There are some rougher edges to it. Perhaps it would round out some, but in all truth, you're also going to have the degradation of hops, and I don't think it's worth the trade-off.
And for me, even if you're talking classic English barley wines, not a lot of hops. They're built to be bigger, sweeter. Do I think those can sit around for a little longer if they're above 10-11% alcohol? I think they will do better than a hoppy beer, yes. But I can't say I've ever had a non-sour beer where I think it's better after 9 months than 3 months. I can't think of a single one. And I used to cellar beer. I still have some 1994 Thomas Hardy's back in my cellar. I still have some 95 through 97 Sommerklaus I was holding on to for a special day. And then once I know it's one of the downsides about being a professional brewer is that you are trained to recognize oxidation. And once you recognize that, it's to me there's not a whole lot of difference between this 05 hog and this 08 hog. Once that oxidation takes over, it is the primary flavor. Everything else to me is just lost in the background. I'm not getting subtle or nuance anymore. I'm just getting that biomass of wet
Yeah.
cardboard.
And we're training this to be,
I'll-
it's an off flavor.
and yeah,
It's not just a compound,
that's what
it's an
training.
off flavor.
And I'll get that same thing in an English barley wine, and so it's a little less offensive to me because the hops aren't oxidizing. But
Yeah.
you know, I would rather have a fresh Thomas Hardy's than a 5-year-old one.
Sure.
Because, and to me, that's the way the brewer kind of meant it to be.
Okay.
For me.
Two things I want to talk about. You mentioned sours and wilds, and I kind of want to go there. But real quick, when you guys talk about off flavors, you look at off flavors in one category, it may be a wanted flavor in another category. So
Definitely.
You look at an old ale, where oxidation, or port, sherry, which is more what I taste than cardboard, like you guys do as an off flavor. What are your thoughts on that? Where you may not want it here, but you may want it there. Do you think that there are styles that, like as an old ale or the lambics, the sours, the wilds, will grow?
So, yeah. Let's leave sours out of it for now.
Yeah,
I think we should
that's
stick
a
to
totally
Saccharomyces
different
wines.
To me, when a brewer releases a beer, that is him saying the beer is ready for the world. And if it's something that should be laid down for a year, I believe that's the brewer's responsibility to hold on to it and then release it. By no means would I ever sell someone something and then say, but you can't have it now, you gotta take it home and sit on it for the next year. You know, that to me is, so yeah, when it's out, it's ready. That's how it's intended to be.
Okay. What would your take be on, say, Stone's vertical epic ales then? Where they give you a beer, they say, taste it now, but buy another one and taste it later.
Hell of a marketing scheme, man.
But they didn't really build many of those beers, and I've only had a handful of them, but just from looking through, like, you know, what they've done to beers, they didn't really build them to be aged necessarily. I'm sure, like, I'm sure if you talk to the Stone guys now and they look back at like 2001 when they were planning this all out, and I do think it's a really cool idea. I bet if you talk to them now and they'll look back, they're like, you know what, I kind of wish we started with a bunch of giant 14-16% alcohol beers right at the beginning that could be aged for 10 years, and then like right at the end you come up with this like beautiful fresh beer that's designed to be had now in that first month.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like they built a lot of those beers to age. I've had some of those beers fresh and they've been awesome.
Yeah.
But would I have sat on a lot of 7 and 8% saisons? Not me personally.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to tell someone else that they shouldn't. You know, I think it's a really cool idea. And
But not for you.
I share his sentiments.
not in this case, but
Yeah.
I think it would be really cool to see something structured like that, where let's say you made a very similar recipe actually for 10 years straight, and you started out as like something bigger, malt driven, 15%, and every year you kind of like scale that down a little bit until at the very end you're working with like a 6% like bright dry hop saison or something like that, and then you drink them all in like that 10th year.
Sure.
The higher alcohol beers, yes, I believe they can age a little better. That being said, like even Mephistopheles, which I have, you know, the three-year vertical for us to try here, like I still prefer it in the first 9 months, and that part of that is that we are trained to recognize and dislike oxidation.
Let's talk about the Brett and the lambic and the sour and wild. What are your thoughts on cellaring that or aging that? Or even your guys' barrel series. I mean, I have a few of the releases that I've tasted fresh and also put away, just to see how they develop and change.
Those, I think we're still learning about as the years go on. I've had way more training in detecting, you know, trans 2 flavors in a Saccharomyces beer than like a lot of old sour beers. I can't say I've ever been able to sit down with like a 10-year-old vertical Grey Fontaine. That being said, to me, sour beers don't necessarily oxidize in the same way that Saccharomyces beers do. I mean, they're obviously oxidizing. There's oxygen in there, fair enough. But I don't get that cardboard, that trans 2, and that includes our wild ales, which are made with Brett's but not sour bugs, and on our sour beers. So, I mean, I've had some 3-year-old Brabant, which is our first barrel aged beer. You know, dark Zinfandel barrels, 8%, Brett's but no sour bugs. Does it have the same like trans 2 and oxidation and cardboard flavors as these? No, not by a long shot. Would I say it's improved over 3 years? I think it probably started degrading around 18 months. I don't think it's degraded massively. To me, a Saccharomyces beer kind of goes, falls. And even Brabant, without any sour influence, without a low pH, it kind of crept along, chewy, what is it? Crept along pretty well for 12 to 18 months. And since then, it's just kind of vaguely tailed. And I've been breaking one out every couple months to try with good food, and it's still tasting great.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing with our sours so far.
For me, it's a loss of brightness. Whereas, like, say, Dehos, you know, I had my last Dehos not too long ago at home.
And that was our like 5th release. It was 10.5% alcohol, sour beer, and fresh Cabernet barrels, aged for about 18 months. You know,
And
good,
it just-
good lactic sour, but not overwhelming sour.
Right, and it just popped, like, right out of the bottom. You just smelled it, and it popped. And then, you know, when I opened, I guess probably 4 weeks ago, you know, I smelled it, and it was like, still a good, you know, great beer. I'm still very proud of it, but, you know, it just wasn't as bright.
Yeah, like some people describe it as the flavors melding together, and to me it's more like, yeah,
muted.
it's just getting dulled around the edges. Whereas even in that first month, Dehos, oh man, it popped. You poured it into a glass, and you could smell that wine barrel influence from a foot away, no problem, and get all these wonderful aromas out of it. Now you got to reach into the glass and like, yeah, it's still there, but even the red wine flavors aromas are becoming a little muted. But even after 2 years, it's still great, and I'm still very happy with it. It hasn't tailed off as quickly as some Saccharomyces beers, but I wouldn't say it's gotten better. Now, the one corollary I'd say to this, though, we're not filtering or centrifuging our barrel aged beers at all. You never see that. So you're keeping some yeast in there, and even that yeast can be or can have an antioxidant property. That was a terrible sentence, but you get the point.
Yeah.
Anyway, it helps a little bit, but we're also not re-fermenting in the bottles. We have some very nice bottling equipment where we can get almost all the oxygen out of there and keep it in as pristine form as we can. I would say there may be something to re-fermenting sour beers in the bottle, because then you do have live yeast that's doing your fermentation, taking up oxygen in there, and those may or may not like help the longevity of the beer. It's definitely going to be a little antioxidant, or have some antioxidant properties in there, but we haven't done enough of it for me to say, oh yes, obviously after 5 years, bottle re-fermentation is absolutely better in every way. But I've definitely had some, you know.
I'd also say there is
sours.
something to be said for the oxygen ingress into the barrel through the oak that, you know, provides for a lot of really slow, it's a certain characteristic of oxidation, a very slow, you know, long drawn out process instead of the oxygen that you get in a bottle during packaging, and that's rather quick. In fact, you have to do this research, Dees. Already saw the paper on it. You'll have to read it and tell me what it means. But you know, where other breweries have simulated that oxygen ingress by basically hooking a stone up to the bottom of a stainless steel vessel and bubbling in oxygen at a very, very low rate in order to account for the wood breathing. And they've used just, you know, stabs or oak chips or something like that to get the oak flavor, but then cut down their time to a third by a constant oxygen flow into the tank. WBC in Portland, look, it's on the paper list.
Nice, honored.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Although this is definitely all pre-packaged stuff, but
So you had mentioned low hop flavor, big alcohol. Any recommendations if someone wanted to ignore everything you've said and take some Avery beer and stash away in the proper environment?
Oh yeah, I think it's great to ignore everything that I say and just figure out what you like and don't like on your own. I mean, I really do.
Yeah, well,
Any recommendations for what you guys make that you would say? I mean, Uncle Jacob's comes to mind for me. Big stout.
To me, Uncle Jacob's Samails. The Samails very low hop. You know, it's basically like a J.W. Lee's or Thomas Hardy's on steroids. You know, 15%er, oak chipped, real clean, caramely, low hop, big alcohol. To me, I mean, I actually do keep like a fresh Samails and a 1-year-old Samails in my fridge at all times. That way, if, you know, there's having friends over for a great dessert, I can split a bottle with 4 people, and that can be premium. And in that case, yeah, you can get some of that sherry oxidation instead of the wet cardboard oxidation. And there's something to be said for that, because you can have poorly oxidized beers and, you know, kind of well oxidized beers. That sherry flavor is not necessarily a bad thing. I just also happen to be not a big fan of sherry, so it doesn't necessarily appeal to me. But I think Samails and Uncle Jacob's are a couple that are gonna, you know, they'll turn into that like nice, like mild sherry flavor for the next couple of years.
To a lesser extent, I think also Czar and Reverend.
I had a bottle of 07 Czar where Adam was going to bring some to a tasting.
With big beers. Yeah, I tried some of that too.
It was even before that. It was like 4 or 5 months ago, and Adam just basically came up to me with a glass. He's like, "Hey, here's some Czar. I want you to try it." Huh? Well, it's a little oxidized, but I mean, I don't know, how old is that? Maybe a year? He's like, "Oh no, that's 5 years old." I'm like, All right, good. Our bottling line is working. That's perfect because I mean it was exhibiting a little of the sherry quality, but not a lot of that cardboard. So while I would still personally take a fresh Czar over it, the fact that it tastes like that after 5 years, it was really good. And I do think that like especially paired up with the right foods, things like that, you know, I think there's the right place for it. And you know, like Chuck, I'm never going to tell anyone, oh no, you shouldn't sell or something. You find out what you like, and then you do that. One man's perfect beer is another man's strain pour.
Yeah, and then we've got a guy on staff, Greg Miller, who is absolutely, you know, oblivious to oxidation. I mean, it's a true hole in his palate, and he can drink anything at any age. And he's probably the most fortunate person I know.
Yeah. Well, when we walk into a beer store, I mean, we have to be very careful about what we buy, just because we're trained in all flavors and trained in oxidation, and so.
Do you buy beer?
Occasionally.
Oh.